From a top secret network of highly secure locations across South Texas, this is the Spurs Insider, the podcast whose true value lies in its real plus minus. I am Mike Finger, the Express News, joined as usual by sports editor Nick Talbot, beat writer Tom Orsborn, and the available on the trading block but impossible to move Jeff McDonald. Jeff, as someone who has been tried to be moved by his employer for a long time and still sticks around, what do you think of LaMarcus Aldridge? Is he going to be able to be traded, or is the Spurs just going to have to? Are the Spurs just going to have to go to the buyout market here?
Well, I just want to back up and ask, what is fake plus minus? Like, if there's real plus minus, what is the fake version?
There are varying versions of plus minus, some more real than others.
Oh, so it's like the news.
Right. And so much like Patty Mills, who is the king of real plus minus, the Spurs Insider doesn't mess with the fake plus minus. It's the real plus minus. So glad we could clarify that. This has become a regular feature of the podcast where I explain things to you. Hope that explanation works. Now let's move on to LaMarcus Aldridge.
LaMarcus Aldridge. What was your question again? I forgot.
Is he going to be traded, or are the Spurs just going to buy him out?
I mean, it's almost – they'd love to trade him. Like, clearly you'd like to get something rather than nothing, but it's mechanically difficult just because of the size of the contract and the low number of teams with cap space, meaning that most teams that want to trade for them are going to have to put together a package of actual players and contracts to move for him. And just all of that makes it difficult. And the teams that do possibly want him, such as Miami or Philadelphia or maybe even Portland, might sense that if you just wait out, you could get him on the free agent market. So, the buyout market. So I think there's a little bit of a game of chicken going on right now where the teams that want him are trying to figure out if it's worth giving up assets for before he hits the trademark, the buyout market. But if he does hit the buyout market, then it's kind of a free-for-all, and you can't trade for him anymore. So I think there's a game of chicken going on right now.
We can back up a little bit. Our last podcast was, I believe, recorded the day before the Spurs' second half opener, in which Greg Popovich scooped all the NBA reporters on the LaMarcus Aldridge news, the news that LaMarcus was not with the team on that opening road trip of the second half. He was not going to play for the Spurs again. They mutually agreed to kind of separate after 5.5 years. And Tom, you can jump in here if you want. I know this seems like ancient news now, but your reaction to the just the idea that LaMarcus Aldridge was not going to be a Spur anymore.
Well, first of all, I'm holding out for a change of heart.
Really?
I like LaMarcus, and we came in together. I came in. His first year with the team was my first year backing up Jeff McDonald.
Similar contracts, if I remember, right?
Yeah. I feel like, and much hoopla around it too. Yeah. So I feel a kinship. Toward LA. But in all seriousness, I really liked him. I just enjoyed the guy. So, but yeah, that was. It wasn't a shocker. But like you said, Pop scooped everyone. But there were telltale signs of it. That were pointing toward that direction. So it wasn't really a huge shock, but the team seems to have adapted. They seem to have found life after LaMarcus to be okay. I mean, they miss him as a teammate, but Joachim and his backup Drew Eubanks seem to be settling into a groove, and it's just it's strange not having him around. And as you pointed out in your column, Mike, it's strange not waiting him out to come in after games to talk to us. But life goes on. These guys know it's a business decision, and as DeJounte Murray pointed out, it's he's really close with LaMarcus, but he pointed out it's good for both parties, and he understands it, and he's going to miss the big fella. But
my dealings with LaMarcus go back to his time at UT when I covered his sophomore season there. My first year covering the Horns was LaMarcus' sophomore season, and then flash forward to 2015 when they signed him. I wasn't at the big hoopla signing day presser because I was in Vegas covering summer league. So the first time I saw him as a Spur, he was doing some sort of thing at the Boys and Girls Club for HEB, giving out back to school backpacks that September. And so I went and said, "Hey, you remember me?" He said, "Yeah, of course I remember you, but your hair is different." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know what that means."
Yeah. I think this has been probably run over to death over the past week, but it's still important, I think, to point out that this is not a Spurs fire sale. This is not a move that says, "Oh, the Spurs are giving up the guy who's made the most All-Star teams for the Spurs on their current team. They must be rebuilding." I think that was the reaction of some casual type observers who haven't been paying attention to what's been going on with this team for the past couple of years. And I guess it's an understandable reaction. But the truth is, and I too enjoyed LaMarcus Aldridge. I thought that he was probably underrated in terms of what he brought to the team in the past few years. The expectations were probably way too high. I thought he was a good interview. I thought he was he was the best player on the floor for a lot of his time in San Antonio and kept them competitive. I think people forget how good he was in some of those playoff series. But the truth is they have been better this year with him not on the floor than with him on the floor. And that moving on from LaMarcus Aldridge, as crazy as it seems, he's made 3 All-Star teams with the Spurs, probably makes them better. And I just think that that's a facet of this that kind of needs to be hammered home, and that this does not mean the Spurs are any less likely to be pushing for a playoff bid this year. It's just something that he, as Tom alluded to earlier, the writing was on the wall. They were playing a style of basketball where he didn't totally fit. And I think another part that goes into it is as long as he was around, there was going to be kind of a sense of indecision or anticipation of when he was finally going to leave. And this kind of gets that over with. They are who they are. I think Jeff wrote that this week at some point. This is their team, and they can kind of be that team the rest of the way.
I think they could have used him coming off the bench if he was willing to play that role. Like I think he could have contributed. Especially you watch Jakob Poeltl limp off last night, thinking, "Oh, what if he's sprained an ankle?" And now they have nobody taller than 6'8" on their entire roster. LaMarcus would have been a nice guy to keep around, but if he doesn't want to come off the bench, there's no use in forcing it. So I think at that point. But what's interesting to me is wherever he goes from here, he's going to be coming off the bench. I mean, I don't think any of these teams that are looking to trade or sign him are looking at him as a starter for their team. They're looking at him to bolster their bench for some sort of postseason run. So I don't know if he's accepted that yet, or if that's really hit home yet, or what his state is. We haven't talked to him. Hopefully, we will get to hear from him whenever he is traded to a new team or signs with a new team, because I'd be interested to know his thoughts on all this.
I think
he deserves to be happy, as DeJounte
Don't we
said.
all?
I think
yes, that's true.
A couple of points on that. First of all, he might not realize that whoever trades for him is going to bring him off the bench. I think he'll get that eventually, but it might be easier for him to accept that on a team that's higher up in the standings, that has that reasonable chance of winning that title that he's never won. And he's also a free agent this summer, and he's thinking about his next deal and maybe another situation is more conducive to kind of him showing off some of the skills that he might need to show off to get that next deal. So I do think every time there's a breakup between a team and a player like LaMarcus, everybody tries to paint it as a mutual decision, quote unquote. And a lot of times that's a bunch of baloney. I think in this case, both sides did want it. And it could turn out well for everyone.
He doesn't need advice from a dumb sports writer like me, but I would look at Carmelo Anthony as both a cautionary tale and a whatever the opposite of a cautionary tale is, because it took Carmelo a couple years to realize he was a bench player now. Going from being a high-scoring all-star to he had to go through Oklahoma City and Houston and was out of the league, and nobody wanted him. Nobody wanted him until Portland took a flyer on him, and now he's playing well off the bench in Portland for a team that it maybe isn't a title contender, but is definitely a fun playoff team, and seems to be enjoying himself. So if I could give LaMarcus advice he doesn't need, I might look at Carmelo and kind of his path as for guidance.
And he did make an effort to sort of reinvent himself, even during
for sure.
with the Spurs over the past couple of years. After years of saying he was going to shoot more 3-pointers, the past year and a half, I guess, he really did. It's still that unit just didn't look the same with him spreading the floor as it did with, all-world, all-NBA center Jakob Poeltl being that garbage man in the middle of it. It just didn't fit the same way. But he did make the effort to embrace modern basketball, and I think that will pay off for him at his next stop.
I agree.
I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
I think he's going to be. I think he's going to be just fine. I think he will adapt. I thought that would be the situation here. I was wrong, but I think he's going to be okay. He's a smart guy, and like Jeff said, he doesn't need advice from us. But I think that in the right situation, I think he'll flourish.
I could have ended that little soliloquy on LaMarcus by saying, "Cool." The way he
should have.
Cool.
The way he often ended his interviews with us in the locker room when we were allowed in the locker room.
That was his way of saying he was done.
He's done when he says cool. It was good. I enjoyed LaMarcus.
That was his 30. Yeah.
I've been told that one of the keys to podcasting is to be is to say something controversial or like just throw stuff out there. Like you don't need to go with the usual standards of like being responsible. So we could like wildly speculate and lead to like this podcast is just going through the roof in terms of ratings. I think the Nielsen people with Nielsen boxes, keep track of podcasts. I'm not sure. Who knows?
I think for us it's just does Leslie Nielsen like it?
That's right.
That's our Nielsen
Leslie
rating.
Nielsen. Shout out to Leslie Nielsen.
We're rivaling. Yes. We're rivaling Meghan and Harry interview.
Yes.
Yes.
Last week when Ringo was gone, we missed you last week. But how did you enjoy your respite from the Spurs beat? Are you refreshed?
Oh, it was great. Went up to Mart, Texas, a little town outside of Waco, and a lot of cattle up there, a lot of goats, and very peaceful. No Wi-Fi, no TV.
You deserve that.
It's just very, very peaceful. Just me and my wife and our dog strolling down Texas Avenue, checking out all the big sites and eateries.
Glad you got rested up for the second half. We dearly missed you last week, but one thing that did come up on that podcast
thank you,
was this new feature where we explain things to Jeff. It's called, I think the feature is called Does Jeff Know? And where we throw things out there to find out if Jeff can explain
Jeff
things.
knows.
So does Jeff know what the Oprah, Prince Harry, Meghan Markle interview was all about?
I didn't watch it, but I saw the memes.
Okay. So
like
could you explain
Oprah making the
newsworthiness of it in
it turns out
20 seconds.
that the royal family of Great Britain might be virulent racists. Shocking.
Yes. The answer to this week's Does Jeff Know is yes. Jeff knows.
I know things that happen in the
right.
news. I don't know things that I know things that happen in the news. I don't know things that happen in terms of
NBA,
anything
NBA
else.
Top Shot?
Yeah, no idea. But we talked to Devin Vassell about that last night, and I had to pretend like I knew. I was glad that we had that segment last week because someone else brought up
Devin Vassell mentioned NBA Top Shot?
Someone else brought it up to Devin Vassell, and I knew what was going on, so I could follow up on that question.
Because of last week's Does Jeff Know segment, you were prepared. So this helps you do your job.
This does a service. Yes, this does a service.
Okay. Well, that's good. We're going to keep this. We're going to keep this segment going, and maybe the viewers out there. And I realize they're not viewers as a podcast, but the listeners out there can send in suggestions for Does Jeff Know. This could be a big part of our soaring ratings. But what I was getting to with the throwing stuff out there is we might as well talk about some LaMarcus Aldridge trades. And there's no inside info on this, but I do want to kind of spell out, as Jeff mentioned at the very beginning, it's hard to trade LaMarcus Aldridge. He makes $24 million. You got to match, in most cases, salary. They need to take at least $19 million back from most teams. But in my mind, there are a couple different versions of a LaMarcus Aldridge trade, if a trade even happens. I still think it's a distinct possibility that it doesn't happen and they end up just buying him out and he goes away for nothing. And that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. You have that cap space. But the versions of a possible LaMarcus Aldridge trade are, first of all, you take back somebody else's expiring 1-year contracts that you don't even have any long-term use for. You basically just trade contract for contract, retain your cap space, and maybe get like a second round pick out of it. And the version of this deal that I threw out there, and it's unlikely, like it's silly, highly unlikely to happen. But you do something with like a Philadelphia, and this works if you trade LaMarcus to Philadelphia for Danny Green's expiring contract and Mike Scotson's expiring contract. And neither of those, we'd love to have Danny Green back as an interview, and I think he'd fit into the system. Neither one of those are players that are going to make the Spurs immensely better, and they don't fit into the long-term future. But maybe you get somebody usable for the rest of the year, and if Philly throws in like a second-round pick, that would be a huge win. Okay, that's version A of a trade. Version B of a trade is the completely different approach, and that is you use LaMarcus's contract to take back somebody from a bad team that is signed for several years in the future. And that's how you use your cap space as the Spurs. An example of this is, and this is unlikely to happen, but let's say you're Orlando, who's not having a very good year. They have several guys signed to contracts for the foreseeable future for a couple of years at least, whether it's like Nikola Vucevic or Aaron Gordon or on down the line. And you say, okay, we'll give you LaMarcus. You can have his expiring contract. That allows you to get rid of this contract that you don't want anymore. And the Spurs fit one of those forwards into your cap space for next year, because the Spurs might not sign anybody anyway this summer. So, but in that case, the Spurs, to make it worth like Orlando's while, would have to throw in draft picks of their own. Does any of that appeal to any of you? Do you like any of those trades that I have mentioned?
The Danny Green, he wouldn't fit in long term, but just for this one season with this one team, I like him being out of the team. He makes a good defensive team even better. Stretches the floor.
The problem there is the Sixers aren't inclined to do that. Right. The people who criticize, I threw that out there, and the people who were criticizing it from the Spurs point of view, to me, that's a slam dunk for the Spurs do it without a doubt. It's the Sixers. Why do the Sixers do that when they already have, Embiid's not going to be hurt forever. They have Dwight Howard, what have you. So you have to look at it from all these trades. You have to look at it from both teams' point of view. But I think you're right, Tom. The Spurs would do that in a heartbeat.
I think when you threw that out there, Finger, I think Embiid's status was still up in the air, and it made the trade made a lot more sense when his status was up in the air. Now that they got a little more clarity there, it doesn't quite fit for the Sixers as well. But yeah, it looks great for the Spurs. But there's a lot of trades out there that you can throw out there, or there are people throwing out there on the internet that look great for the Spurs, but not so much for the other team, which is always the question when you're playing with the NBA trade machine or whatever a device you're using on the internet to create these trades and with the salary cap.
The other version of a trade is to use one of the teams that actually have the cap space, whether it's the Celtics trade exception or the Knicks have some cap space. But neither of those teams have any use for LaMarcus Aldridge. Like, you can just kind of nip that in the bud and say LaMarcus isn't going to be traded to Boston or New York. So I think I mentioned to Jeff at some point this week, and to talking to some other people who cover the league, and they're kind of pitching this as a avenue for the Spurs to take. And I'm not sure if I explained this totally well, but the situation is this summer, if LaMarcus is gone, the Spurs and DeMar DeRozan's contract expires, Rudy Gay's, Trey Lyles, what have you. The Spurs could have $50 million in cap space, but there's no obvious target for them to spend it on. So, you look at the list of free agents this summer. Not many of the big names are A, all that attractive, or B, all that likely to end up with the Spurs. So the other approach with LaMarcus would be to find add a player who's already signed for a few years and fit them into your cap space long term. And I don't like these deals, but someone mentioned to me, as an example of this, the Sacramento idea of Buddy Hield is signed for 3 years and $60 million. Harrison Barnes is signed for a couple of years. I don't really like either of those players for the Spurs, but that would be an approach to take. I think you'd have to throw in a pick or some kind of other kind of asset to get a player like Harrison Barnes. You definitely would have to throw in stuff to get Vucevic from Orlando. But yeah, I still just think it's hard. Jeff.
Yeah, that one's a lot tougher. I know a lot of Spurs fans, of course, probably want Vucevic from Orlando, but you have to throw in a lot to get him. You're talking multiple picks, Lonnie Walker, a couple, maybe one of your or two of your young guys, and then the other trade you mentioned there with Sacramento. Maybe that's more likely because they need to reset a little bit, or maybe an Aaron Gordon is more realistic because you don't have to send back much to get Aaron Gordon, because it doesn't seem like Orlando wants to move forward with him either, but they still have him. So maybe that's a little more likely, or an Evan Fournier. How do you say it? Fournier? And Fournier. There we go. I can't speak French. Tony Parker would be disappointed. But those two guys would be a little bit more. I don't know how Fournier works. Fournier works with I can't say it today. Works at all with the Spurs. Aaron Gordon could, but I don't know if he adds a lot more. So even those trades, nothing looks great. That's kind of the problem when you're composing any of these things. Nothing really looks great for the Spurs. Nothing really looks great in free agency either. So it's a kind of a tough situation on how they want to spend that cap. It's going to be interesting. I mean, they could throw a deal out at John Collins, but he's restricted, so you never know what's going to happen.
John Collins is the long shot deal that I actually the one that I love right now. I don't see any way Atlanta does it, but you can trade. He's going to be a restricted free agent for the Hawks. He's having a great year. He plays a position in power forward. He's a big man that can play fast and shoot. He's sort of exactly what the Spurs need. If you wait for him to get on the free agent market this summer he's going to be restricted. So whichever team he's on will be able to match. But the Hawks are kind of willing to let him go. Right now, and there's no inside information here. I'm not breaking any news. But if the Spurs would make that trade for Collins right now to where he's your restricted free agent, I'd throw in a first-round pick. I'd throw in some good stuff to the Hawks to trade for John Collins right now, and then have him be your free agent signing this summer. But I think that's a long shot.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't see him parting with of the young core. I just don't think that would go over well, and it's too early. Lonnie, I'd hang on to him. Yeah.
Yeah, I disagree with Tom. For John Collins, I think you part with Lonnie Walker. I mean, if they ask for Derek White, I might see what the summer holds. But if they say Lonnie Walker, that's something I think I would do. Just because I think John Collins, there's no question John Collins is a superior player to almost any of the young guys except for Keldon Johnson.
The issue with
John Collins can be an all-star. I don't know. I don't think Lonnie Walker may or may not be an all-star one day, depending on how many games you win. Really hard to make an all-star team in San Antonio, apparently. So
the issue with all the young guys that Spurs have is they all kind of fit the same profile. And it's like they've done a great job of collecting these long, athletic wing players, guards over the past several drafts. I mean, they've drafted well. But you look at the list, you go to DeJounte Murray, Derek White, Lonnie Walker, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson. That's 5 guys right there who probably aren't all going to start together. And would you love to keep them together forever? Yes, that'd be great. But I think eventually you're going to have one of them is if they all continue to blossom as they have, like you're not going to be able to pay everybody. You're not going to be able to play everybody. So if you ever are able to cash in on one of those for someone who plays a different position, it's something to consider. We're not trying to get rid of any of these guys right now, but I think in terms of roster management, and I also think because the Spurs have drafted so well in the past 5 drafts, future first-round picks probably are becoming more expendable. Like, do you keep needing to add more first-round picks to this group, or do you cash those in for somebody who's more established? We'll see. Jeff's been quiet for a while.
Did Jeff go and watch that Meghan and Harry tape?
I'm back. Yeah. The royal family is racist.
Uh-huh. Allegedly. I think we should. We don't want to get sued by the royal family.
Yeah.
I think according to Meghan Markle, they have done there may have been some racist things said, but we don't want to make any broad pronouncements that get us, in trouble with the FCC. We haven't really talked about the basketball itself, and we'll finish with that in the closing minutes here. The past week they went 2-2, coming out of the All-Star break, and I think that's pretty reasonable. There was one really bad loss, a couple of big wins. They seem to be settling into what they're going to be, and what are we looking at this week? It's Chicago on Wednesday, Cleveland on Friday, Milwaukee on Saturday. Those first 2 aren't great teams, but these miles are starting to probably add up on them, and will over the next couple of months, right?
Yeah, it's like just this week, 5 games in 7 nights, and then the road trip's over, and you still play every other night. Like, it just never ends. So that's why it never ends. The road goes on forever. It's a song I heard once.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, the teams and it's why you got to win the ones you can. And so I would say since our last podcast, the Spurs have kind of done a good. I know they got bombed in Philadelphia, even without Embiid, but you expect them to lose that game. Beating Orlando at home and winning at wherever they were last night, Detroit. That's doing your work. So you got to win the ones you can win, and Yeah, Chicago's better than they have been, and Cleveland's better than they have been. But those are games you got to win too. Spurs lost at both those places last year, by the way. Chicago and Cleveland, tight games.
Cleveland was my last game in an arena, at a packed arena. Actually, that was a year and a week ago.
It was an overtime thriller.
We get to see Brent.
Yeah.
Get to see Bryn Forbes on Saturday.
He'll be good. That'll be good. The podcast listeners will love seeing him again. By the way, if you're going to get bombed in a game, you want it to be the first night of a back-to-back. Like it's the perfect night to get bombed. Because then everybody rests. You come back the next day and you can bomb someone else, which is what they did with the Pistons.
Drew Eubanks gets his career high. Like, it's great. Everything worked out in Philadelphia except for the final score.
Still think
it was nice for them to get the win on the back-to-back too.
Still think, in terms of the prognosis, the prospects for postseason, they're kind of where they have been. Haven't really done much to improve or fall back in their position. I still think they're going to be competitive for those 7 through 10 spots for sure. That's probably where you're going to finish up the years in that play-in tournament, and I think that's fine. Just see how it develops. As always, like to finish on a positive note, and I think I want to focus on the fact that these next couple of months could be wearying and tough, but I love that Tom Ringo Starr Orsborn was able to get a lot of rest and to get in touch with nature and to really get a mind reset for all this. And I think that's an inspiration for the rest of us to get outside, take a look at what's great, and take care of each other and keep it real.